Blessings, everyone. Welcome back, YouTube. I'm so glad you're here again joining us for the 7th decan of 36 and the first decan of Gemini. Happy birthday, Gemini. And welcome back, David Fisher from In the First Place and KD Dayton by the same name on your website. Yeah, how have you guys been welcoming the spring? How is Taurus 3? How y'all feeling?
I object. I am going through the fall and it's cold. It's really, really cold. We're having a subtropical storm this season around here in the south of Brazil. So it's been snappy.
Yeah, it's actually, we've been in a little cold snap too. We prepared the garden last week and now we were ready to get everything in. And now the ground is freezing again. Very Saturn in Taurus 3. Making us not able to plant the seeds yet because we're getting still a couple little ground freezes. So it's definitely got that chilly vibe over here too. Yeah. So how about you, Katie?
Oh, I'm a Gemini sun, so I love this season. It's also transiting my 7th house. So I'm feeling it. It's a good deal.
Yeah, well, happy birthday, KD.
Soon. Not until Gemini 2, the very end of Gemini 2.
When we will be due it, thanks for mentioning it, when we will be coming home and doing Gemini 2 a couple days into the decan, because we will be just hot off the press from NORWAC. Okay, so at this, we'll be seeing you all. This is the last one before we see you all at NORWAC. So again, please come up to us, come say hi.
And this will actually be a documentary on Katie's life.
Yes.
Yep. Oh yeah, every word.
like the one from Paris Hilton. That's the one we're gonna get.
Yep.
Okay, so back to Gemini 1. So Austin Coppock, the author of 36 Faces and the History, Astrology, and Magic of the Decans, calls this first face of Gemini the apple of Eden. Susan Chang calls it fate versus free will. So we are in for a ride already. Thanks, Gemini. So here, Austin, I'll read a little almost direct quotes of just some notes that I think sum it up pretty well as far as Austin's chapter. In Gemini, the soul explores its capacity for variety. The self becomes aware of the duality within all things, especially itself. The proportions of yin and yang emerge, and from this initial vision of the dual, the language of binaries erupts, unlocking the capacity to code all things. So, to me, when I'm thinking about just the overarching themes of this decan, we've got Mercury. So we've got the Mercury significations that are going to be running with us the whole time, of sport, and especially now here, sports and the sciences and this kind of like fast moving quickening that happens with Mercury. We've also got Jupiter ruling as the second lord of this 10-day Gemini 1. And Jupiter takes its detriment here. It's, not as happy as it could be. It's exactly opposite its home. So its natural significations are challenged a little bit. So we can think of making a big deal out of small things, or many, many, many details to sift through, or things like that. And when I think of like code, of just like primary computer coding or something like this, or just this capacity of dualism in general, the yin and the yang, what does it mean to be completely separated or one of the same thing, or the big versus the little, fate versus free will, these kind of splitting moments of merging.
One of the things that I always think about in relation to Jupiter in Gemini or in Virgo is overthinking or making mountains out of molehills, which sounds a lot like what you're saying. Yeah.
And the thing about it's about balance as well, because even though when you get the Libra or the Venus part of Aries, Or yeah, the Venus part of Aries, which is the one that we talked about with detriment so far. This is another example of that same thing. But instead of being a malefic sign, it's just Mercury. So it's more about the mental capacity that the person has to put factors together, put different pieces together in one narrative. The person who has Jupiter in one of those mercurial signs will have a difficulty creating a narrative with pieces that are useful for them and will not understand. But this is the natal position of the planet Jupiter in the sign, not this particular decan, just so you understand the duality of these energies and how they play together. In this particular decan, the person would be more aware of this particular duality, as Elsa was saying.
Yeah, and it reflects in the tarot that we're about to talk about, and I won't totally steal the punchline from Katie introducing T. Susan Chang's book, but slowly I want to segue into it just because we can't, we're starting with, you know, a new set of cards for Gemini now, and we've got the Lovers, which is this, you know, representation of the twins, or the representation of the other and the one merging, you know, the qualities. Again, you know how we've talked about that like masculine feminine duality here in the Lovers, or in Gemini in general, especially with that mercurial quality. We've got like a androgyny, or like a family, like, is it, you know, like the twin, the baby twins, the boy and the girl. We've got, you know, just that kind of moving in on itself of the yin and the yang, or of the Lovers. Are they diametrically opposite, or are they cut of the same cloth? You know,
Right. Is it soulmates, or is it just like nemesis? You know, what is the two?
and is it me? Is it all contained in me?
Or is there another? Yeah.
Is there another? All of those kind of questions, and it reflects also in the other major arcana that we're talking about, which is the Wheel. And it again is like, we're going to be talking a little bit of what we were talking about in the World card from last decan, of the cyclical nature turning upon over on itself again and again. And as you know, David had mentioned this a little bit when we were talking briefly before we pressed to go on the camera, of just, you know, Saturn with that World card and that cyclical nature. We have here Jupiter, which is the other superior planet, that we have that representation of time. And here we have it referred to, you know, as the Wheel of Fortune. So it's having something to do with highs and lows and the kind of weighing of those things, which weighing is a part of the Mercury Jupiter vibe, right? Because Mercury is the merchant and Jupiter is like, you know, a heavyweight, let's say, or something like this. So you've got and wealth or lack thereof. And you've got this kind of like Jupiter being religion and Mercury being like this kind of crosser of the worlds, and this androgynous character meeting up with these like Jupiterian kind of ideals and laws. So,
and another way I think about that is going broad Mercury versus going deep Jupiter. They're very different ways of consuming information and of processing information, which I think really speaks to this decan specifically as well.
yeah.
And one thing that
No, go please.
okay. You have the Wheel of Fortune and the World card having these beasts around them, representing the fixed signs, and that is a future planning kind of idea. The fixed signs, they are about long term, they are about stability, much like Saturn is, and much like Jupiter, right? And it's interesting that these two cards in the tarot are about moments of finalizing things or splitting things up, or realizing that things have pivoted or changed because of circumstance. But what Elsa was saying on the Jupiter and Saturn association with these cards as well makes me think of how institutions, things that are of higher rank and hierarchical power in our society, they also confuse themselves with circumstance sometimes because they act in a way that is difficult to change quickly. And so they become these mouthpieces for circumstance in a way that when they break, or when something happens to them that is immediately noticeable because it disrupts the whole system as it works, those moments, they are tower moments as well, but they come through circumstantial factors that are the
And
Wheel of
that's-
Fortune.
Exactly, and that's Mercury here challenging the system or arguing against the systems that be, or, you know, that wheel, that cyclical, like the rise and fall of power and how it's challenged and how it's disrupted. And
the wheel would be like a broader thing even than the tower. For instance, the tower in that context that we were speaking about would be the disruption of the company, of a determined company, in a way, their financial system, let's say, in front of what happened circumstantially. The wheel turned, like Bitcoin, for instance, for the past weeks, has been dropping circumstantially in a never before seen kind of way. So this is the Wheel of Fortune and how it can spin things around, how it can pivot things around. These larger structures of life corresponding to Saturn and Jupiter, they are also able to pivot our lives in a bigger way because they move those structures.
yeah, and with Mercury and e-commerce and moving fast and all of those things, it naturally challenges the structure of like this kind of abundance the way that Jupiter knows it, which is grounded, stable, and long lasting, or something like this. I wanted to mention, I guess, I have so many tarot cards in front of me right now, and I don't want to distract, but we'll use this little thing as a segue into T. Susan Chang talking a little bit more about the concepts and showing you some more cards. But in the Hermetic deck, we've got 3 cards I'll show you briefly, but I just wanted to mention when we're talking about Jupiter that I thought it was of interest to me, and I thought would be definitely of interest to David too. Let's see if I marked the page. So this letter in the Wheel of Fortune card means palms of the hand. So, and it's pronounced Kaf, I think, or Kaf, I'm not sure, excuse my pronunciation, but it means palms of the hand. And so we've got Gemini, or Mercury, as hands, especially Gemini. And when one of our teachers in one of his lectures, David, you'll remember this, talks about Jupiter's underlying principle of being like something that stands beneath and offers up, something that is a given, something that is an offering, and it's being like risen and offered underneath the native, its sense of support. And that's like how he's describing Jupiter. But I thought that that was really beautiful to talk about the hands as Gemini, and it reminded me back to this talk of talking about Jupiter as being this sort of offering support underneath something with the hands, and then it being reflected back to us in the Kabbalistic letter, or in the Kabbalistic tree of life and its letter signification. So
I really love that. And I'd like to say something about that too, which is the things that the hands, or that the Mercurial or Gemini item is holding up, is the Jupiterian expectations. And so just going back for a second about what it means for Jupiter to be in detriment, is that there are missed expectations. You know, there are expectations that are not met. And that's something else that's really interesting to think about in relation to the dynamic of Mercury and Gemini. And I believe it was that you didn't cite that that was Robert Schmidt.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
we must say. Yeah.
I can't believe I didn't. I'm so sorry. I took it as a given, apparently, which I definitely shouldn't be. So maybe I should. I can't cite the talk because I get them kind of mixed up in my mind. But it was Robert Schmidt in one of his lectures that was describing the planets and the modes of being that they sort of operated within and how to understand them or think about them. And it was like this offering up of support. And in this case, you know, maybe Jupiter can't offer that type of support, and it's Mercury's hands more like. So it's quicker, and we've got to think about the little things that you can't get done because of details, or the surmounting amount of things you have to get done, but they will not get fulfilled, or they will not get seen all the way through, at least right now. This sort of like pushing of big energy forward and trying to get through all the little details of it, and maybe not finding success all the time.
How do you dominate? I like that. Can I add to it? Reminds me also of something that I learned from Dana Lynn Knuckles, the People's Oracle, which is things that she says in her lectures on YouTube. You guys can check her channel out. It's about taking things at face value with Mercury. You have narratives in your head that are important so you can live your life without having to make tough decisions, tough calls of life or death all the time, because you've gotten used to that environment. You have mastered, like the magician, all the nuances and devices that that particular environment offers you in order for you to not even think when you act within that particular environment with its resources. Now with Jupiter in this particular deck, and we are having this energy kind of, oh, but there's this way of combining it, there's that way of combining it, and mix it all together, you might, blow everything up. And when you have that multiplicity of informations, of data, and this is a good segue into the card of the decan, but I don't mention that yet, so it's just a teaser. But with all this information abundancy, you kind of have a difficulty that teaches you that you need to pick your poison. You need to pick your narrative. You need to be able to have that feeling of taking things at face value in order to get used to something, in order to be able to integrate something, in order to be able to really master any particular idea and know where you're going, have a sense of direction. Not that life will cease to be unpredictable, but you will know how to navigate it best because it's the way humans are wired, I guess. And this is the Gemini card, right? The lovers, when you make that connection between masculine and feminine, and you have a divine purpose behind it, meaning you put some limits, you put some ideal behind the actions that you take, and you are being sensible to those ideals when you are doing something, because the woman is the sensitive part and the card is the feminine part of us. Looking at the higher ideal. So she is connected with what the higher principle is and telling the male part of us, the action-oriented part, how to best enact that ideal. And when we are in tune with that particular inner ideal, that's when we enact in the world our true selves. And I feel like that card brings that out through circumstantial, and it's interesting associated with the world, with the Wheel of Fortune card. It's like, yeah, got to make a choice. Got to see it through the larger picture.
Yeah, and that choice.
Pick a side.
Exactly. Like finding the choice or the capacity for variety that Austin was talking about. Just the sheer amount, like when you think of coding, it's fast and it's tons of information, but at some point you have to organize that information. And I guess the wisdom here is like the organizing of it, like the yin and the yang. Yes, it's turning, but there's these like elements that we have to choose. It's black or it's white, and they exist in each other. It's almost like that organization of mind that, sometimes we're not going to get here, but it's like working on that. It's kind of like, we'll get into that with like the sewing, or some of the things that T. Susan Chang will talk about. But it's not necessarily like keeping your mind occupied with busyness, but there's this capacity to want to explore all the details. And when something is presented to you, like, let's give an example of, like, let's say you have a really smart teacher or a guru or something like this, and they have this vast amount of knowledge. It's so easy to be like, I want to pick this, I want to pick this, I want to know all the things all at once. But Jupiter wants you to stay and learn and steep and like really get it and study and spend your lifetime dedicated to this thing. Well, you can't spend your lifetime dedicated to all the things and every little particulate of information or something like that. So that's the push and pull here.
Yeah. I do think that there is something really interesting about this. And I have to say, you can totally cut this out if you want to, that I have a lot of sensitivity around this topic as a Sag rising, Gemini sun, lots of that element. My partner, who's actually a programmer, is a Sag sun, Gemini moon. So we have this dichotomy going a lot on between us. And we criticize each other for consuming too much information. Right? Mm-hmm. Consuming too much technology and relying too much on the answer box in our pockets, aka the phone, to guide a conversation or answer a question if we have one, versus pulling back and kind of dwelling in the philosophical abstract nature of what that question might be. So again, that's like a personal anecdote, but I think it's really important too when you think about how this applies in all sorts of different ways. And the fact that you bring up programming and coding specifically is super applicable. I think that is a skill that is almost comes naturally, is very comfortable for a mercurial person. But when you bring a Jupiterian person in to do mercurial things, you get almost like a different skill set because it's seeing the system for the parts.
Yeah, and I know this wouldn't be like naturally thought of, like coding and sewing together, but give me a second. And first of all, thank you for sharing the personal antidotes, because I love them, and it's true. So yeah, it's welcomed because you have personal experience with this. So this is your like area of expertise. But the sewing and coding might not go together, but you have this like little thing. You have to cut each seam, you have to turn things inside out, you have to lay the seam, you have to do it. It's so much like tedious like handiwork. And then, you know, with the, and we're sorry, we're kind of going out of order, but T. Susan Chang will talk later more about sewing and needlework. It happens in the Picatrix as well. We talk about it. But kind of like the design of a dress or the design of a robe, you have to have the bigger vision of the dress in mind, but then you have to like take the measurements and cut it out and make sure all the seams are right. And then you've got problems with the sewing machine. Inevitably, I always do.
Yeah, no,
Probably
it's like,
trying to
if you
go too
ever
fast.
tried to go in enthusiastically to sew something, you've seen how bad it's turned out. You have to take the time, you have to measure, you have to, yeah.
You do. And then like a seam could pull and you have to not be mad about it. Go back, snip the little thread, take it back out to get this like larger vision of the clothing item or the performance piece that you're trying to create, whatever that kind of like bigger vision is that you're making. And it takes so much of these little steps and it can feel overwhelming. So if you've ever worked on a sewing project, it's perfect. If you're not a seamstress and you're just dabbling, or even for a seamstress, I'm sure there's a lot of steps. There's a lot of things to be considered. There's a lot of little stitches and things to be, you know, what kind of thread you're using and you know. So yeah, gauging your thread. So yeah, I think the details mixed with the larger vision, and I think this can get us back around to the Lover's card, because in relationships, I think when they're successful, I'm going out on a limb because I don't know, but you would seem like having the same larger vision is what would keep lovers from just being quick lovers to something that's sustainable, because it has like a larger vision together.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the time,
Principles, Jupiterian things that you have in common, like principles,
Yes,
philosophies.
yes, and a lot of times, right, we get it, lovers squabbles. Like what happens with the lovers, it's always the little things that annoy you in the house and on the daily basis, like the littlest thing, like leaving your threads around the house or whatever, you know. It's like those are the squabbles that if you have that bigger picture, those squabbles don't get in the way. But in this case, we have that inverted. So the little things are taking the highest seat and the bigger things are having to give way to that. So we don't always see that kind of like a bigger success picture here, which we will get into with the card, just the idea of indecision and too many choices and things like that. But when I think about the Lover's card here, we have this Serpent Fire deck, and it illuminates more kind of the howling of the black and white wolf. Like in a lot of the cards, we see like the howling of the wolves, and it's just that desire to find the other, right? And just that nature of like the lonely wolf howling at the moon, and this kind of like desire of wanting the other and maybe not integrating it, or when we get it being kind of like messy, or all of these things, right? All of these things. So let's go ahead and continue into like the full tarot T. Susan Chang opening. You want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, sure, totally. Right, so we've already kind of gone through the associations with the different tarot cards, Mercury being the Lovers, and so I'm going to show just a suite here of the Lovers cards. David and Elsa, can you see my notes over the screen right now?
No, your screen is just the photos.
Great, thank you. So what we have represented on the screen right now are one of the most familiar iterations of the Lover's card, which is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck on the far right. In the middle, we have the Scapini deck, which both Elsa and I are quite fond of from the Renaissance era. And then on the left, we have the Mother Peace deck, all 3 different associations of the major arcana card. The Lovers, again, that's Mercury. And in her chapter in 36 Secrets, T. Susan Chang talks about the meaning of this card being about choice, about splitting, about doubling, all these things that are very mercurial. We do associate them with Mercury, but even more so Mercury specifically in the sign of Gemini, or Mercury in association to the sign of Gemini, which she says breaks things down into bite-sized chunks. So its attention is literally split in this decan. That really gets at the duality that we were talking about just briefly as well, the split being of 2 minds, literally. And we'll go on to the Wheel of Fortune in just a moment, but the Lovers, she kind of paints the 2 figures in this card. She paints them as trying to grasp onto the destiny, almost like 2 different ways to grasp onto the destiny that's spun by the Wheel of Fortune. So it's as though, you know, these 2 figures are actually one within you, that you are trying to make the choice between which way will I go? How will I accept what fate has spun for me?
Yeah, and in this depiction, and it was kind of being spread throughout the meaning of the card, is Adam is standing in front of the tree of life, which is associated with the Kabbalah. And then Eve is standing in front of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, again, making this, you know, parallel and choice, this Garden of Eden, Kabbalistic, you know, even, I'm sure we'll say it explicitly, KD, but that wheel being that, you said spinning wheel, but that spinning of the thread, again, we talk about here.
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely the spinning of a thread. And I really like the imagery as well. It sounds like Chang is herself maybe at least a hobbyist seamstress or sewer, talking about the Wheel of Fortune in that regard.
Yeah, she says that she does, at least in the book, she said she did do some portion of making her living off of it. So some portion of it she's familiar with.
Exactly. And I think that's beautiful for this card specifically. But before we move on to the Wheel of Fortune again, I do want to share a couple of my thoughts and experiences with the Lovers cards in tarot. The first being, we've already addressed duality, but I do see the Lovers sometimes coming up in places of indecision. A lot of times it's when you're having a hard time making a choice between 2 things, which is something else that you see interestingly in the 2 of Swords, also part of the Swords suite in tarot, but it's almost like a more important and a more pinnacle division or indecision happening in an individual's life when they often get the Lovers coming up.
Yeah, how I heard it in the story of the journey of the man tarot is that he goes, you know, it's the fool's journey, right? And then he goes like through the high priestess and through the Hierophant and all this stuff. He's learning from his teacher. He sees his mother and father and da. And then this is the first time he's faced with the other.
Yep.
And the other has been alluded to this whole time. We've been building on this other concept with like Shiva Shakti and the pillars and the high priestess and the pillars and the Hierophant. And now we see them, and we played with it also, the 4 of Wands, where we see the coupling, or even in the 5 of Coins, where we saw the 2 people. We have these, we've been noticing these dichotomies, but here it's in this like, really in your face, the first time it's been presented as this concept of the Lovers. Even here you see the cups, right, depicting these scenes of lovers and battlers,
yes,
waiting to be filled, right?
Yes.
Waiting to, or we don't know if they're filled.
Yeah, we don't, yeah, it's, I love this card specifically that you're referencing here from the Mother Peace deck, because of the myth behind it and some of the myth that's being depicted. You know, the Mother Peace deck is great because it represents a wide variety of cultural symbols in the deck. So it's not always something that maybe would appear in the Hellenistic or even medieval tradition. But these vases that are depicted on the front are definitely Hellenistic. They're of an Athenian style that might be found in like the 7th century BC. And it goes into this in the Mother Peace Companion Guidebook, like when these were modeled off of. But both images depicted here are actually of the same myth, and it's the myth of Achilles and Penthesilea, I believe is how you pronounce her name. And Penthesilea was a Amazon warrior, or what might be referred to as a Bellatrix. What a great word, which is Latin for female warrior. And she fought for Troy in the Trojan War, and was actually slain by Achilles of the infamous Achilles heel. So in the image on the left, you have this battle going on between Achilles and Penthesilea. She actually is holding a sword and fighting back against him. But then on the right, you see them in an embrace. And apparently, right as Achilles was going in to murder her, the Amazon warrior woman, he caught her gaze, and they had something of a moment of longing or desire between them, which is another very interesting part of duality. And the duality of the lovers is it could be love, but that also can quickly turn into hate. You know, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. It's both passion. There are both things there that are, motivating and action and forward momentum, but it's the choice of how that manifests.
And every lovers know,
right.
to all you lovers out there. What I thought was cool just to add, thank you so much for telling that story. That's so perfect. And that captures this type of duality that we're gonna keep trying to get at perfectly. What was interesting to me is obviously the Lover's card is representing the whole of Gemini, but in this one I also see in the next decan, decan 2 of Gemini, is called the Walled Garden. And so I saw this kind of being represented here in the card too. So in case we don't get to it next time, I just wanted to just point that they might not be a Hellenistic deck, but we both love this Mother Peace deck because it's so complex in what it does bring to the table. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
awesome. So if I don't know if either of you have anything else you want to say about the lovers, but I was going to move on to the Wheel of Fortune next. All right, so the Wheel of Fortune is the major arcana card associated with the sign or the planet Jupiter. So again, the kind of opposite side of Gemini as the lovers being Mercury. In her book, Chang talks about, and we've already actually referenced during our chat here, about how this is the fall of Jupiter in Gemini. Detriment of Jupiter in Gemini. Mercury signs are not necessarily friendly to the broad-minded, somewhat philosophical or abstract. Jupiter doesn't necessarily do well with lots of little parts. And what I find interesting, which I referenced when we were just looking at the lovers, is how Chang weaves a picture of the correspondence between the Wheel of Fortune and the lovers, in that the Wheel of Fortune is spinning the fate. They're actually creating the destiny as it falls out before the lovers, and then it's up to them to make the choice. But I thought it was so cool in this deck, in the very middle, which is again the Dreaming Way deck, that the Wheel of Fortune was depicted as a literal spinning wheel with literal thread being spun from a textile. So that was a really important depiction for me to share here. But on the right, you also have the Rider-Waite-Smith, or the most recognizable symbol of the Wheel of Fortune. David mentioned just briefly earlier as well, but I want to call attention to it again, that just as in the World, which is the tarot card that had a planetary association with Saturn in the deck, the Wheel of Fortune representing Jupiter has a similar motif of the fixed signs being represented in the four corners of the card. So the bull, the lion being Taurus and Leo, and then the eagle being Scorpio, and the angel or the human figure being the water bearer or Aquarius. So those fixed signs existing in the corner of the outer planets in the traditional sense, the outer traditional planets associated tarot in the major arcana.
And I want to call attention to the fact that it's only through strife that you appreciate stability and resource. Because and that's what I think, that having the fixed signs around these two cards that represent finalizing stuff and beginning cycles again, or splitting moments, they allow you to visualize how the uncertainty of life might serve you in a way, or how it might be in your way. Either way, how will you deal with it in order to remain stable, right? It calls back a little bit to the idea that we were talking about with Mercury and the High Priest, with Saturn, with Taurus. But in this case, it's just really the understanding that life's like this, and having a dominion over that particular faculty of, oh, okay, so now that I understand that life's like this, whenever a setback happens, I'm gonna understand it in a higher dimension, in a higher way, not just react to it as if it were the end of the world because it was attached to a determined little narrative that shifted.
Yeah, and what I was also thinking when you were talking about that, David, is we have to learn to deal with it. It's not its fault. It's not incapacitated, but we have to learn to deal with this dichotomy here of who's serving her, who Mercury will end up serving Jupiter with all of its details. Here, Jupiter doesn't like being at service of Mercury, it's like a teacher whose patience is getting tested. It's like Gemini has all the questions and Jupiter has all the answers, but it's like, I can't tell you it all right now. And it's this question, it's that question, and no question is a bad question, but the teacher has to know that these annoying questions that start in the beginning that every single student asks, that I could just get to if they just listen to the whole lecture or whatever it is. It's that kind of like demands from Jupiter, because Mercury is in charge or whatever. It gets to decide, there's all these things, there's all this stuff, we got to deal with it, and Jupiter's feeding it more and more stuff to go through, and it's just kind of like,
well, because God is infinite, it can argue in that way,
exactly.
right?
You're never going to know everything.
And Mercury is brand new here, right? It's the first time we've seen Mercury and Gemini is brand new. So it's not like, it's budding, and it has to learn all these things, and it's getting just given this rush of information, and it feels like it has to choose, and it's pulled in all these directions. It maybe doesn't have the wisdom to choose like which direction to go, and it's in this deconstructionist mode at the same time. So it does bring about overwhelmingness and confusion. Some people could feel like pushed by this, right? Like really pushed by the energy, but yet kind of trapped and not really having a conclusion.
And I love what you're saying, because I want to tie to the Schrödinger cat. I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
In the Wheel of Fortune depiction of the left, because you have no need in this concept to know. That the concept is not knowing if the cat is is alive or not in the box. So through making this experiment, he's able to or supposed experiment, he's able to prove something that you cannot speak of directly, something that you cannot convey to someone as a direct ideal. You have to experience it, Jupiter, in order to be able to grasp it fully. So this is a mercurial task as well, like the logos capacity that you have to make someone experience your reality the same way you do, to bridge, Jupiterian word, your reality to the reality of another person in a way, because you can describe to them what you're feeling, but not necessarily with words, with actions, and things like that. And you can only do that if you've really understood the higher picture of things, if you really understood how the dynamic's playing out, if you have an overlapping vision.
Like the lovers, right, David?
Yes, exactly.
It's like when you first meet someone, you're like, oh my God, it's so great, and we can talk forever. And then quickly it's just like spiraling into this thing where you like know nothing about them, and now you know too much about them, or like, just kind of like all these overwhelming
But
data.
if you know how that, but if you keep in mind the higher ideal that that's how relationships are supposed to go, as long as the person is not toxic and you guys can convey your messages to one another and find that common ground, then then you know how that's supposed to work, and that is not going to set you back in the achieving the fulfillment of the relationship.
That's
Well,
right. And
okay, so your interpretation of this was perfect. And I have to admit that I had to actually look up what the Schrodinger's cat experiment was before I could understand this card fully. So if I can back up for a second and explain what it is, just for anyone who's not familiar with it, it was an experiment in quantum physics to prove that we couldn't tell, what is going on inside a closed box with a cat in it. Now, this is horrifying, and I hope they didn't actually do this experiment, but the theory being that we couldn't tell if the cat was alive or dead. All right, he said at this experiment where the cat was either killed or kept alive in this box, nobody else could see it. They didn't know if the cat was alive or dead. But the idea being that once they opened the box, that moment when they opened the box was when the cat became alive or dead, because without observation, without actually being able to experience and see a dead animal, you have no idea what it actually is. So it requires, these are some other Jupiter things, like faith, that there is still a cat in the box, and that there are laws of things existing or not existing, which is very, very interesting in relation to, I thought it was an amazing representation of the Wheel of Fortune as a scientific concept, for it to be Schrodinger's cat and Schrodinger's experience here.
And Mercury too. It's like you close the box. How do you know it's there? It's very deconstructionist. It's like ask the right questions. How do you know what's in the box? How do you know it's there? How can you tell if there's life, Jupiter, or death? And it's like this spinning of the wheel. How do we know about our own fates or karmas, or how do we know what happens after death or before if we can't see in the box? It's like, it's like a very liminal, mercurial kind of.
I want to read a quote from the little white book that goes with this deck, the science deck. It says, "The Wheel of Fortune suggests all the unknowable possibilities the future may hold for us. It is our own actions that will finally bring the result. To find a resolution, we must bravely take a chance, spin the wheel, and open the box."
There you go. I actually want to read from a little white book too, because when I show the cards, I want to give like a shout out. So that wolves howling at the moon, or at this pyramid depiction, and this wheel is from the Serpent Fire Tarot. I use her She-Wolf deck too, which you've seen me put up before. But in this particular deck, the artist, gosh, I should find her name to mention, Devani Wolf, she gives like little mantras, quote unquote, like not Sanskrit mantras, but like little words of advice, I guess you could say, at the end. So I thought I would just, it reminded me so much like a Gemini would love that, right? Like a little clip that they can use throughout like Gemini season to keep them like on track or whatever,
Yes, we love it.
So I'm going to give us those, and then you can like write them down or put them on your mirror, or like do whatever you do to like clip these little kind of like moods. And it's very, very simple. So the Lovers, it's dichotomous wolves is the card. The mantra is, I work on myself in love. So you know how we, everything gets revealed to us through those we love, our family, our lovers. It kind of like shows us our best selves, our capacity to be like our best and want to be our best for someone else who we love. Our parents are our lovers, and our worst selves and our shadow sides. And we tend to like, lash out at the people who are closest to us, and they see our worst moments and things like that. So it's about that inner reflection. The Mercury wisdom here would be to like not be caught up in all the frantic outside details and go in on yourself, to kind of like bring all those details to this experiential wisdom that David was talking about. So again, the mantra is, I work on myself in love. And then the Wheel of Fortune, Jupiter, the changing constant. So this idea of anicca, for those of you who took Goenka's Vipassana, he always goes anicca. It's this principle of the only thing that we know for sure is change. that's what we can count on and take stock in and faith in, is that everything is constantly erupting into change. So that concept here in the Wheel of Fortune, and the mantra is, life is a river and I go with the flow. So even if you can't see your ideals come to ultimate fruition here, and there's blocks and obstacles, T. Susan Chang talks about, like, oh, you know, the everyday practical version of this can sometimes be, you know, I get a flat tire, or I have to wait for like just different, like those quirky things that happen with travel plans. Think Mercury retrograde type of stuff. And just to go with the flow, it doesn't mean that your projects will not come to fruition, but we're not pushing them through, but we're staying persistent. So that's kind of my life is a river and I go with the flow.
I love that. I love that.
So
So should we talk about the Eight of Swords?
Yeah.
I was waiting for Katie to like announce it.
I'm sorry, I
No,
was just pulling my screen
okay.
back up
No
so we
problem.
can. So I was just pulling my screen back up to show a few instances of the Eight of Swords, which is.
So yeah, let's talk about just like we've been introducing the majors, and so like this happened to us. This has happened to us before, where we get these beautiful majors, and then these terrifying results or whatever.
I don't know
So
if
if
you
we're
can hear the
talking about
thunder in the background, but like something like struck right as you said that, and then.
and then terrible results. So it's like, you know, we've gone over this before, where we get these pip cards or minor cards that have these sort of terrifying images, and you know, just to be warned, the whole season of Gemini will be the 8, the 9, and the 10 of Swords, and they're all pretty horrific cards. The swords are mental, right? And it's these kind of anguishing sort of things that are being pulled through. So yeah, Katie, how do we get from the Lovers and the Wheel of Fortune
to this?
Can I make a disclaimer with that, what you're saying, Elsa? Like, I know that we are making these associations with the tarot and all of that, but we have to remember that these are two distinct oracles. And so even though there are decanic associations of these cards with each with each decan of the zodiac, obviously you have the depictions being sometimes very particular to the cards and the meaning of the cards, and not so much associated exactly with the astrology of it, because there are some nuances that are particular to the tarot. So that's important to keep in mind. So even though we do have the energy, clearly, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be talking of it, of the Eight of Swords in this particular decan, it's important to remember that it's in a higher concept regarding astrology that we are talking about here. And the Eight of Swords in the tarot will have its own particularities.
Yes.
That's why the depiction is not solely regarding
Super
that.
important. You know, like when I was going through it and reading about the Gemini minor arcana tarot associations throughout the decans, it is disheartening, you know, just because you have these more negative pictures of the cards doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that sign, with that decan of that sign, or that it has anything to reflect personally about a person and their natal chart in relation to the astrology.
Again, yeah, let's talk about that. It doesn't have to do with astrology at a whole. It doesn't have to do with you. If you're a Gemini 1, you are not
or 2 or 3.
Yeah, you are not.
Your life is not an eternal Eight of Swords necessarily.
No.
That's
right.
not what we're saying.
No. We're talking about big overarching things because it's fun to talk about like occulted, cool, like oracle information. We're not like, this is not an end all be all. This is not a natal reading. This is not even like a personality characteristic.
Not at all. Not at all.
Like that.
However, you can make a characteristic that this is a really good time in the year to raise this, because Aries and Taurus have been a bit of a mixed bag with the benefic or malefic influence. But when we come to the swords here and some really tough minor arcana cards, we just want to make sure that our Gemini brothers and sisters do not feel as though anxiety is overcoming them.
Yeah,
Katie's a Gemini.
These are mental anxieties as well, because they're the kind of like culmination of the swords, and all the swords are like this mental energy, and that's why we're getting them. And you know, the Hermetic deck does associate this specific Eight of Swords to Jupiter in Gemini's sign, but there's differences even within astrology as a whole and the way the decans are thought of and how they were created and all that. So the decans are already this weird thing, as you guys know. So please don't, please don't go down on yourself, because this is like, we have hard cards in the tarot and we have hard things in life, and we're just trying to get at some of the expressions of where to file those hard things. We're gonna get some of you signs that have like the death card and the tower card and all of these like.
Ooh,
And honestly, there are school of tarots. Sorry?
I said, ooh, Scorpio, woo. Have some good times.
There are schools of tarot that teach the swords and wands decks, even the positive, more positive cards, as cards associated with strife or with difficult situations or with having to put in a lot of effort because they are active. Much like the ancients also thought of the active signs, the masculine signs. So if you are going to consider the pictures in the cards as significators for your whole narrative, just because your sun sign is contained in one of these decans, you're going to find yourself very limited in one particular very negative narrative. So don't do that.
Yeah, it's a good disclaimer with astrology too, because it's like everyone's like, oh my God, my Saturn or whatever. It's like everyone has Saturn.
Yeah, everyone has
It's
Saturn.
like, and everybody's like so worried about it. And it's like, well, what about Saturn ascendants? Like they're not dead and fucked. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, and
Like,
I mean, Queen Elizabeth is reigning so far. I mean, how long has she reigned? Capricorn ascendant.
Yeah, so we're just, like, don't get like caught up in your mind. And this is probably a little bit, this disclaimer has to do with the general energy of like what, I've been feeling it so much. We have this project we're trying to push through, but yet listen to our bodies, and like we have deadlines, but they might not get fulfilled. And you have indecision. And in this card, you see this woman, she feels as though her hands are tied and she's blindfolded and she's in a cage. These swords are a cage for her. And it's the cage of the mind that we keep ourselves in and we feel bound by. And just like the box, we can't see.
Right.
And we don't know who's going to save us or if it's our own selves. So just, keep it in mind.
And as with, I like to really remind people of this, especially when you're first studying astrology, and it's especially true here. We have every single sign. In fact, we have every single decan in our charts, each and every one of us. It's beautiful. They're all represented. All right. So don't be scared. They're in all of us.
Thank you, Wheel. And we all feel you, and we all, yes, exactly. And this is that Gemini yin yang wheel moment where we are all in this constant churning of the sky together, and we're all in the shuffling of the cards together. So one of my biggest pet peeves is when, like, I love the humor of like astrological memes.
Yes.
I really don't love when it's like preachy or using it to like kind of be snide to someone else, like, nice one, Capricorn, or you're such a fucking Virgo, or like something like that. Let's not beat ourselves or each other up with these depictions of life that we flow through. Let's not do that. Let's like love each other in hard times.
Unless it's a very intimate friend, then you can read them to filth and still love each other. And it's totally fun.
Yes.
The duality of it all.
That's lovers, right? Like, can we rake each other through the coals? Are we loving it and being funny? Are we there for each other?
But you can only read them to filth because in the background, in the higher perspective, that they are there for you. That they're your
buddies. And when you're feeling this indecision and feeling trapped, that's when it's best to have love, lovers, compassion, the idea that we don't have to make a choice, or we can make both, or we can find some liminal space in choice.
Yes.
And the ever-changing nature of things. And when we're going through hard times, that's when we need love and our lovers the most, and a mercurial mind the most.
This is such a perfect, couldn't have staged it better, segue into, again, Chang calls this fate versus free will, this chapter, and this card specifically, the Lord of Interference. You can't always know what happens, right? You can't always know what the Wheel of Fortune is going to turn out. So you may think you're in a good position as the lovers to make a choice, but then another one gets thrown in there. And so that's why this Eight of Swords finds themselves in such a dramatic scenario. you can't necessarily predict the whims of fate. Sometimes you must be a prisoner to destiny. And that's what she is. That's what she is here. She has the swords all around her, enclosing her in. But if you notice, those binds, they look a little loose.
And
Like,
there's swords right there that
them.
I would just shimmy up
That you
against.
just shimmy out of. It's like, all right, listen, you seem to be holding yourself in this confinement mentally because
Yeah.
your mindset, your thought processes are being interfered with by something a lot bigger than the small details you have in front of you. And that is why this card is kind of, you know, dramatically down looking is that choice, that decision.
And it is, again, it's looking inward into the little pieces of the past, the things that happened to you, kind of reassessing. I know that reassessing is more of a 7 in the tarot kind of theme, like reassessing your resources, what's going on and stuff. But with the 8s, you kind of have things going at a speed that you cannot control. And with the swords, you kind of find that resistance that I was talking about of some people talking about swords as malefics. You find that resistance of something that has been set out, like if a bullet has been shot out of a gun, you will not stop it unless you have something equally or more or stronger than the force that was applied to that bullet to stop it in some way. Or resistance to it, that's able to resist it. So in this case, in the 8, we are learning to have that resistance. We're learning to have that, to go with the momentum of life. And that can be scary. We can get caught up in trauma. I see 5 swords in one side, 3 swords in another. If you think back to the 3 and the 5 of swords, they are very contemptuous cards. The 3 is a deception, is a plan that goes wrong, a failing that hurts, because you were set out in a particular way and you banged against the wall, banged your head against the wall. And then you have the 5 of swords, which is keep doing that thing that got you to hit your head on the wall, because you're like, no, but that plan has to work. I don't understand why it doesn't work. Well, sweetie, broaden your perspective. Why do you keep going in that direction?
Yes.
You know it's not going to work. You had that experience. So the 8 of swords is not something new that comes up. It's just us lapidating some ideal that we have already forsaken, that we have already gotten rid of, but we don't really know what to replace it with. And now we are kind of reassessing in a new circumstance, which ties back to the Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah,
and the
it
Lovers.
ties back to not seeing, like, love is blind, and we get ourselves in these binds, right? We get ourselves in all these mental binds, and it just,
you have to look inward, know yourself, these things that the blindfold
when you're blind,
represent.
where do you go? You go inward. That's the wisdom here.
Blindfold is also in that 2 of swords that I was talking about earlier. That's like a little bit of a lesser lovers, and that you have to make a choice in the minor arcana.
Yeah, and the Lord of Shortened Force is what it's called in the Hermetic deck, and it kind of reminds me of like that force of Jupiter trying to push through, and the shortness or quickness that we are kind of feeling that puts us in those sort of pressurized states. Yeah, and forcing us to have to look within.
It's yet another example though here where we see, like, you really look closely at the symbolism in these cards. There's a castle, there's like civilization behind her, there's a little bit of green and some water at her feet. She's not in as dire of straits as she might think she is.
She has 1 feet in the water, 1 feet on the land, kind of symbolizing that equilibrium between having a plan that suits your necessities and things like that. She's in tune, or trying to get in tune with that. So the card kind of brings all of that out. The buildings in the back kind of as the narratives that you construct also.
Yes.
And how strong are they?
Yeah, the cliffs of rock above you. How far do you actually have to climb? Is that in your imagination or is that real? The middle card is again the Scapini deck, and the one on the far right is Michael Ulrich's tarot deck. Always recommend, all 3 of these are among my favorites, but that middle one, Elsa, I know you have this deck too, and I really think it's a very interesting one because it looks as though this is a professor, an academic who is studying medicine that has a patient strung up doing experiments on them in a very dramatic fashion.
And we're going to go to this when we talk about the Picatrix as well. We're going to get some of these significations coming through, these mercurial significations that we'll reveal once we get there. But when I saw this one, I hear you, that's there. And what also is here for me is the judge. And when I think it, Jupiter is the judge of the law, and mercurial nature is like that of the eternity or the attorney or the lawyer, right?
Yeah.
So you've almost got like this the persecuted, right, in the swords, and the judge sitting there deciding the
You
fate.
could even just say he's higher educated, because it's either medicine or law, being represented.
Yeah, both. It's just, it's not, this isn't a literal thing. It's not like what they tell me the deck is about, but it's something that I like see in it, and kind of that reflection back at the majors. And the duality too of the two owls, and in a lot of cultures, owls meaning wisdom, but also death. And you just see that kind of like, that medicine, experimenting for the greater good kind of thing that happens with like law and especially medicine.
Experimenting, judging, you have to constantly be doing those things if you want to adapt to reality as it is and to circumstance.
And what's the law of the viewer changing? It reminds me of the box. It's a little different, but it's on the same like kind of quantum line of like the viewing of the experiment changes the experiment.
Yes.
Right. And I forget what did you say, Katie? Do you know the name of, what is it, the law?
No, I'm forgetting exactly. Well, it's Schrodinger's cat, but it's
right. But whatever the viewer, it has an impact on like the cellular experiment or whatever. So like by not viewing or seeing the cat, or not seeing or looking within and can't see without, like that all just comes to mind for me with the mathematics and the experimental nature of we have to watch, we have to grade, we have to judge, we have to keep track of the details when we're doing an experiment. We have to be able to throw out old ideas and start again with new ideas, and never come to a conclusion, and work for however many years to not come to a conclusion, and then know that we're influencing it all along. So
you of being the observer.
Exactly. I wanted to read from T. Susan Chang's, just this paragraph. She says, the 8, the 9, and the 10 of swords illustrate with extreme prejudice what it might be like to experience the judgment and the expulsion, blind and stumbling from the garden. Providence, the wheel of fortune, was granted you. You made the choice, the lovers. You broke the rules. You ate the fruit of knowledge. You thought you were smart, and now you must live by your wits. You think you want self-determination and free will? Go ahead, knock yourself out.
I love it. So snarky.
And we are familiar with this fate and free will thing. I, even before astrology, took it up as like a hobby horse of mine, and a lot of intellectuals do, because it's like the crux in the road for a lot of thinking. But as astrologers, we have to deal with this fate and free will issue more than most, just in the nature of what it is to be an astrologer, or make predictions, and just fate in fatalism.
And I just want to say, even if you think you personally settled it, it comes up constantly from people who ask you about it, right? When you're reading for them. Wait, what? Is this fate? Is this free will? It's like,
Yes. And we do have to draw harder lines, because it comes up for us so often. So we've probably thought about it and had conclusions more than most, but that's the thing, is it's constantly coming up for us. It's something that we ourselves have to work with, is this Jupiterian and Mercurial idea of fate. And it's sort of like locked in, like a lot of people feel like locked in or in a mental prison or whatever from that fate idea, but really it's like, they have this blindfold on, and it's kind of this dichotomy that just comes up so often for astrologers. So if you are out there and you're practicing astrologer, you're probably going to get it. If you're interested in astrology and like, how in the world does that work or whatever, that's what you're bumping up against. You're bumping up against fate and free will. And it's a big one for academics, for spiritualists, for it's a big one for law and mathematics and all these mercurial things, science and coding, and it's a big one for religion and Jupiterian things and academics. So that's
and stitching. If you guys want to go out and make some nice dresses, this is the time.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get those seamstress. I did think about pulling out my sewing machine when she started talking about it so fondly and lovingly.
So I just want to read the Picatrix real quick, just because I mentioned stitching, and it's a short paragraph, so we can just keep talking about T. Susan Cheng after as well. But here it goes. There arises in the first face of Gemini a beautiful woman, a mistress of stitching, and with her ascend 2 cows and 2 horses. Sorry. This is a face of writing, computation, and number, of giving and taking, and of the sciences. This is its form. So again, reinforcing a few themes that we've already risen with computation, math, sciences, all these things, and the stitching. Having an idea before you actually can sew something.
Right.
If you have ever watched RuPaul, you know how hard that can be. Like, yeah, and any fashion show really.
Yeah, exactly. And it does harken to fashion, doesn't it?
I don't know if do you remember this from the recent interview that T. Susan Cheng had with Chris Brennan in the Astrology podcast, how in an effort to remediate some of the more negative effects of swords cards, especially like the 8 of Swords, she would actually use needles as a representation of this, and have the 8 needles to say, all right, 8 of Swords, I've satisfied you, throwing those down. Now, to me, that actually seems super appropriate to this decan, right? It's like taking the idea, okay, yes, there is fate. I need to fulfill this fate of the 8 of Swords today. Let's take 8 needles, and I have, with my free will, fulfilled that destiny.
Yeah, KD, I'm so happy you mentioned this. You don't know this, but in the decanic cover images, instead of using swords as to just be a little bit more gentle on my Gemini viewers, I use needles.
And I love it. I love it. I love it so much.
Indeed, I have taken, that was a huge takeaway. Thank you, T. Susan Cheng, for that astrological magical tip. I love it and I use it. And, just the sewing, obviously it's a connection for us, but just to make it explicit, we've talked about like the pulling of the thread of the 3 fates in our previous decan videos. So if you watch back, we'll talk a little bit more about kind of this primary idea of the pulling of the thread of fate with the lore of the fates.
So on that note, I want to go to the celebrities, can we? Or the nativities, sorry, that we have here, because some of them are not actually celebrities. They are just really well-known people. So yeah. Do you want to mention anyone, Katie?
Oh, I love the idea of mentioning Helena Bonham Carter. She's an actress, and I think she's known for working specifically with auteur directors. So like Wes Anderson, like Tim Burton, who have a lot of control over the details of their films, but she's such a powerful personality that can like kind of fit into those roles, but be super recognizable and super amazing in those roles. And it feels a little bit, Jupiter Mercury to me.
Yeah, completely. I think I'll just take one out of our list because you guys can talk a little bit more about the rest, I think, better. But one honorable mention and shout out I wanted to say to my fellow Minnesotan is Bob Dylan, who is a folk singer and just an amazing musician and just totally, completely embodies some of the duality and nature of his music and his persona and his activism and all of those things and he's, mostly, I think like a New Yorker in general, but came from Minnesota. So shout out Bob Dylan.
He's amazing. Yeah, just the real like poetic rambler, but that's also like broadly traveled, that nomadic vibe. That is
completely, and bringing up big things, but then hearkening through or like slogging through like the details of his songs, and they're very story oriented. And a lot of people, it's like he does push back and does feel, you feel kind of this like meandering nature of the Mercury in Gemini, with just like the attention to detail, but kind of the bigger picture as well in his storytelling.
We have Queen Victoria in this particular list. She's a Gemini one. Not much to say about her really. She was an empire. She ruled an empire that was very based on abuse of other cultures. She also,
As
yeah,
do
she also,
queens.
yeah, she also had a lot of children, which is a very Jupiterian thing, like 9
Well,
children.
and as his rulership, ruling an empire is quite Jupiterian in a way.
Yeah, in itself, very, very kingly of or queenly of her. So we have the,
at least in the US, that exist beyond Queen Victoria's reign though too. You think of Christmas trees, you think of wedding dresses, you think of these like customs that have lasted beyond her reign that almost socially had more than everything else.
Absolutely. Wearing black for widows, wearing white for brides. Yes. She set the tone for a lot of things that we still do in the Western society. Yes, absolutely. The mourning period, like the Victorian era, had the way, felt the way it did because Queen Victoria was depressed most of the time. She was also addicted to a lot of drugs. So you have Idina Menzel, and not to say that people who struggle with drug addiction, I mean, she was a very privileged woman. Let's just take that. But we have Idina Menzel, who is the voice actor for Elsa. She's an actor on Broadway. She's the Wicked Witch of the West. And I love just the imagery of a seamstress or someone who stitches with Elsa, just building, like, not this Elsa, the actual frozen Elsa, building like this ice dress and ice castle, like out of nowhere. So yeah, Rise is a beautiful woman building an ice dress, singing Let It Go.
Exactly. And you know what, I have to say this right now, it's not, maybe I can add like a chapter or something. This is a total break from the Nativities, but I was like stressing a second ago, this is so perfect for the Decan. When we were talking about it, I was like, note to self, you won't forget to say that or whatever when it's important. And I did, and then I was like, what was I gonna say? What was I gonna say? And I just couldn't recall it, so I just let it go. But I wanted to just, this is important to me that I really wanted to get in this video. So the reason why we see the end of the sword suit here in Gemini and some of this really heavy ending imagery has to do with the Thema Mundi, because Cancer starts out the new cycle in the Thema Mundi. So this is the last sign. This is like the ending sign, right? So we've got this like total kind of like
12th house of the Thema Mundi.
Yes, thank you. There we go. This is kind of what I'm getting at, is we start at the Cancer Decan, and these last Geminis are like these last throws, and that's why we get this like hard, worrisome death, like kind of decomposition, like kind of like this tower moment or something like this, right? Because it's the last Decan of the Thema Mundi, the last sign of the Thema. Yep. This is not the last Decan, this is the second to last Decan, or would be, or whatever.
And you have like Sagittarius being the 6th house. Also, you have Aquarius being the 8th house, and those are two difficult pieces within the Decan walk.
Yeah, and you see some of this difficulty too coming through. I mean, we started ours at Aries 1 because I wanted to start with this sun kind of like plowing through on its Decan, on its exaltation or whatever. But if we do this again, maybe next year we'll start at Cancer and give ourselves a few months off instead of rolling right into it. But that's kind of, you see kind of these like tumultuous kind of closers and like kind of this like agitation with the spring, because the summer was really this like hit of the moment of birth. So what you're seeing with kind of some of this turmoil and then this change that will happen in the summer, you're seeing that bigger Thema Mundi coming through. And so I just wanted to mark that, and we can go back to the activities. Sorry guys, I wanted to bring this up when we were talking about the 8, but
that's a
it's very nice. Sorry. I was just going to say it's very nice because those signs also don't have exaltation lords. So the Thema Mundi is very growth and life oriented, and how astrology can serve us from the perspective of what affirms life. And in that sense, the Thema Mundi starts in Cancer because it is the sign that is ruled by the moon, and you follow with the sign ruled by the sun, which it is the principle of higher rank and authority itself, versus Saturn. So no one really exalts in Leo because the sun is already ruling, and no one exalts in Saturn sign Aquarius because the sun is in fall, it is in exile there. So no one can be exalted there. These
No
principles
one
of life.
Gemini and Sagittarius. So
yeah, no one is exalted in Sagittarius as well because they are more, I think, ideal signs. They are about more circumstantial things that carry off the meaning of life, that
which
are a
is why
result of consciousness.
in some
perhaps.
traditions the nodes exalt, because
Right,
those are
right.
about conditions and situations that change you rapidly.
And they are a result of consciousness as well, the suffering that comes with being conscious about reality, I feel, with experience of this reality. And they carry off the themes of the 7th and 1st houses. Yeah.
And if you think of the mutability there, you're thinking about, it's almost like it's a transitional phase, kind of like Mercurial is like the lord of the underworld. It can kind of like switch and go back and forth. You got that with the Sag Gemini about that kind of like concluding or deconstructing between seasons or between points. So anyways, I wanted to mention that because I think I'll be talking about it a lot in the Cancer, and I wanted to make a note of it, and I wanted to say it at the 8, and we're still in Mercury retrograde. So I'm going to continue this through that when we talk about Cancer, and I'll probably continue hearkening back to this example for as we learn through these Gemini decans. So if you're feeling that, that's what you're feeling. You're feeling that ending and that kind of like chaotic decline before the start of the Thema Mundi.
We also have Naomi Campbell, just in case anyone wanted to know.
No, we're back. We're back with the nativity. Yes.
Speaking of chaotic decline.
Yes.
Yeah, next.
Sorry. We also have Stevie Nicks, which I think is a cool example. I feel as though she's a rock star of Fleetwood Mac and, her personal projects. She's an amazing singer-songwriter, very Gemini, but also with a little bit more of a witchy or occult bent. And I think that's sort of appropriate for this decan somehow. So she's a good example. We also have Jeffrey Dahmer.
Another extreme example. Yes,
we kind of go for the extremes in these cases. We look to the outliers because they might be extreme examples of how some of these things could manifest in nativities. Even if it's not the average, it's an extreme example of how things may have manifested there.
And a lot of people look at these charts too, so that's another thing that we want to bring up is that. Did we cover all of them? I'm kind of lost in the list. Lauryn Hill. Did we do Lauryn Hill?
I think we are.
Lauryn Hill. Yeah, Lauryn Hill's one.
Of course, Lauryn Hill is a good one. But yeah, I think we almost got it covered. The only thing I wanted to show that we're kind of left off dwindling is this one card. But then I wanted to invite KD. I kind of tried to return us to some original structure as we close. Do you want to I'll show the card, and then do we want to read the poem to close again? Because I love the poem. I
absolutely. This time it's a good one. So yes,
they're always good. It's just sometimes last time, honestly, guys, we had to cut off early, so we kind of missed a few things because of storms and internet. We've got storms and internet popping off at KD's right now. We're kind of rolling with it. But this one, which is the Wheel of Fortune in the mother piece that we love, I just loved how the display of the zodiac was around the outside and the planets were aligning on the inside, and it's just a really beautiful kind of cosmic representation of the wheel that I just love. So
honestly, I'm embarrassed because that's one of my favorite cards in the whole deck. I probably should have thrown that up as a whole slide, but there's so many rich things to look at in all of these tarot
There are, and Lord knows all of the details and everything we're doing and all the preparation. It's just busy season. Like we can't remember everything. And it's a really hardcore between eclipse Mercury retrograde right now. So thank you guys for bearing with us. I'm sure you're in the same boat if you're watching this live. So yeah, it is such an awesome card. It's such a pretty card. Okay. KD, would you mind taking us out with the poem?
Yeah. Are there any announcements or anything that you all wanted to make first?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the announcement.
Yeah, no, don't forget about those.
Yeah, well, NORWAC, basically, we're gonna be at NORWAC. It's in like a week. I'm packing. I'm gonna try to get my stuff together to get, you know, you guys updated on Instagram.
Literally
stories,
tonight. Yeah.
yeah, like follow us tonight on Instagram. I mean, it's up, but you know, I just haven't done stories and all that stuff. But yes, so we're packing and we're going to NORWAC. Please come up, hang out with us, say hi. If you've ever caught these videos, come up to us and say hi. And I think when KD and I can't film or like when we're in transit and stuff, I just got a Clubhouse. And David, you're on Clubhouse too.
I'm on Clubhouse.
Yes, we've been on Clubhouse. We have friends that do stuff from the Astro Collective over there. So follow me on Clubhouse for real, because David and KD and I will all be on Clubhouse, just like very informally chatting over there, but like talking about the speakers and different, you know, experiences. So please follow us on Clubhouse. We're going to be totally downloading there when we don't feel like being on camera. We're en route and we're just going to like keep it on and keep it talking and popping over on Clubhouse. My name's Elsa Wadsworth on Clubhouse. I'll put it in the link below. David, I'll put you in the link below as well. And then you guys, your websites quick?
Yeah, I'm in the first place, astrology.com.
I'm at ktdayton.com.
Both amazing astrologers, tarot readings, all of our stuff is available. So come on, check us out. We all love doing natal astrology. We all want to read your charts. Hit us up at NORWAC. Ah!
So excited.
See you after NORWAC, everyone.
All right. So I'm going to read the poem at the end of T. Susan Chang's chapter on the Lord of Interference in 36 Secrets. It's called Instruction by Hazel Hall. My hands that guide a needle, in their turn are led, relentlessly and deftly as a needle leads a thread. Other hands are teaching my needle. When I sew, I feel the cool, thin fingers of hands I do not know. They urge my needle onward, they smooth my seams until the worry of my stitches smothers in their skill. All the tired women who sewed their lives away speak in my deft fingers as I sew today. Beautiful.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks so much for watching and joining us for this experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Matao kako bersama yo kena soba da soba kena matai banako di ma kena soba and soba atai banake ujuno ba ikana kamaya da onga ija Okoyo Masena Mataibe kana sabaso Inakina Tabaine Toyogas Imbayatoma Watabaike